Hi there. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Cup of Joe with Joe and my super cool co-host Dave.
Hello.
As you learned in the previous episode, we enjoy watching horror movies, so today we bring you some scary stories in today's segment of Dave's Garage. Hope you enjoy. Also, please keep in mind that our full source is available on our website, cupofjoewithjoe.com. Let's get started.
Tonight we'll be sharing 5 spooky stories, so make sure to grab your coziest blanket and your favorite cup of Joe. Let's get started. Our first story today is going to be about La Llorona. When I was about 16, my friends and I decided to camp out by the river near our hometown. It was a popular spot for fishing and relaxing, especially during the summer months. That night, we set up our tents, made a fire, and shared ghost stories, laughing and joking about the mist that surrounded that area. Of course, La Llorona was one of the tales we recounted, but we treated it just as a story, until that night. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a heavy fog rolled in. Shrouding the riverbank, the air became thick and cold, and a sense of unease settled over us. Around midnight, while we were sitting around the fire, we heard something in the distance. A soft, mournful wail. At first, we brushed it off as the wind or an animal, but as the crying grew louder, it was clear something was off. My friend Miguel, trying to be brave, suggested we investigate. A couple of us were reluctant, but the thrill of fear got to the better of us, and we agreed. Armed with just our flashlights, we walked toward the river, where the sound was emanating from. The closer we got, the clearer the weeping became. It was a deep, haunting sorrow that sent chills down my spine. When we reached the riverbank, we saw her. A woman in a long, flowing white dress stood at the water's edge, her back turned to us. Her hair fell in dark strands down her back, and she appeared to be staring into the water. I felt a knot in my stomach. It wasn't just the eerie sight, it was an overwhelming feeling of despair that seemed to envelop us. We exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do. "Is anyone there?" Miguel called out, trying to sound brave. The woman turned slowly, and I'll never forget the look on her face. Her eyes were hollow and empty, filled with an unspeakable sadness. I felt a wave of dread wash over me as she began to cry louder. Her wails echoing through the trees, it sounded like a mother mourning her lost children, and it was heart-wrenching. Panicking, we turned to run back to the camp, but as I glanced over my shoulder, I saw her stepping closer to the water. It felt as if she was reaching out for something, or someone. We sprinted, our hearts pounding, not daring to look again until we reached our tents. Once inside, we huddled together, trying to rationalize what we had just seen. My mind raced with thoughts of La Llorona, her tragic story of loss and the children she searched for. None of us dared to sleep that night, listening to the sound of her wailing drift through the darkness. It felt like the river was alive, echoing her pain. In the morning, we packed up our things in silence, each of us haunted by what we had experienced. We didn't speak of it much afterward, but I knew we all felt the same dread. To this day, I can't explain what we saw that night. Was it a ghost, a trick of the light, or just our minds playing tricks? I don't know. But I do know that La Llorona isn't just a story. She's a presence that lingers in the shadows of our memories.
Oh man. I don't know. Like I said in the other one, if I saw just a person just crying in the middle of the night, I would be so scared. I would definitely run away.
Well, I don't know. I would be inclined to try to help someone out, but
You know that movie with what's that actor guy? He did the Passion of the Christ.
Mel Gibson.
And he was in the post-apocalyptic movie.
Mad Max.
Okay, in Mad Max, he there's a lady who's in the middle of the road, and she's like, kind of, I think, tied up with like.
Oh yeah.
With something, and
it's a trap.
Yeah, it's a trap. How do I not know it's a trap?
Yeah.
Like, okay,
That's
sure. True. I also want to help someone, but I also don't trust anybody.
Yeah.
I will think automatically it's a trap.
Our self-preservation prevails. So, yeah, I mean, I'd want to help someone too, but at the end of the day, I think I'd rather play it safe and keep ourselves alive.
Yeah.
We never know what's out there.
We're going to grab our babies, Toby and Buddy.
Our dogs.
And just run away.
Yeah. Okay, so that was our first story. Let's go ahead and jump into our second story. I like reading this one. This is about cryptids, also known as, more specifically, Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, or Yahweh, or the Yeti. So let's jump into it. I've always been a believer in the possibility of Sasquatch. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, stories of Bigfoot were as common as the towering trees around us. But it wasn't until one fateful camping trip that I had my own encounter. It was a late summer, and my friends and I decided to take a weekend trip into the woods near Mount Rainier. We were seasoned campers, excited to spend a couple days hiking and enjoying the natural beauty. On the first day, we hiked several miles into the forest, setting up our campsites near a small secluded lake. As the sun began to set, we gathered around the fire, swapping stories and roasting marshmallows. Around midnight, while the others were winding down, I felt restless and decided to take a walk to the edge of the water. The moonlight illuminated the water, creating a serene atmosphere. As I stood there, enjoying the quiet, I heard something unusual. A low, guttural sound coming from the tree line behind us. It wasn't like any animal I've heard before. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination. After all, I was in the woods at night, and sounds could be deceiving. But then I heard it again, closer this time. My heart raced as I strained to listen. It was followed by a series of heavy footfalls, like something large moving through the underbrush. I felt a primal instinct to flee, but curiosity held me in place. Suddenly, I noticed movement at the edge of the trees. At first, I thought it might be a bear, but as the figure stepped into the moonlight, I realized it was something else entirely. Standing about 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown and black hair, it was a massive, humanoid creature. It had broad shoulders and long arms, and its eyes reflected the moonlight with a strange intensity. I stood frozen, unable to look away. The creature seemed to be just as surprised as me. For a moment, we locked eyes, and I felt a wave of both fear and awe wash over me. It let out another deep grunt before slowly retreating into the trees. I watched as it moved into surprising grace for something so large, disappearing into the shadows. In a panic, I turned and ran back to the campsite, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I burst into the tent, waking my friends, trying to catch my breath. I could barely explain what I had seen. At first, they laughed, thinking I was joking or exaggerating, but the look on my face must have told them I was serious. The rest of the night was restless. We heard string noises, twigs snapping, distant calls that echoed in the darkness. I kept glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see the creature return. As dawn broke, we gathered our things, and I recounted my experience to my friends again. A few were skeptical, but others were intrigued, and we spent the morning discussing the possibility of Sasquatch. We packed up our tent and hiked back, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I had always been fascinated by the legend of Sasquatch, but now I felt a deep connection to it, as if I had stepped into a world I could never fully understand. Since that trip, I've researched Sasquatch more intensely, reading everything I could find. I've talked to other people who have had similar encounters, and it feels comforting to know that I'm not alone in my experience. Whether it was a misidentified animal or something truly extraordinary, I'll never forget the night by the lake and the creature that emerged from the shadows.
Man, yeah.
Do you believe in Bigfoot?
I don't know. It's really hard for me to say that I believe in Bigfoot, but I remember you telling me this one story about this guy who was in the forest, and I think he was with his dog and he was in his tent. And in the story, he starts hearing like loud noises, and then all of a sudden, like two Sasquatches were talking to each other, like making
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like I don't know, I think like a tree trunk gets thrown at him, and so he runs to his truck with his dog. So he jumps in, and all of a sudden, like the Sasquatch starts chasing him after him, and I'm just like thinking that is terrifying.
Yeah.
I don't know like what it is, but if I see him, this gigantic hairy man, I'm gonna be really scared.
Yeah. The story goes that he feels like there's something around him. He doesn't know whether it's human or not. So he quickly packs up his things, his camping gear, and runs with his dog to the truck. And he feels footsteps right behind him. He doesn't know what it is though. Half of him thinks that it's just him being paranoid, but he just jumps in the truck anyway. And as he puts his truck in drive, the rear tail lights illuminate the rear of the vehicle, and he can see a giant creature emerge from the forest. And he starts accelerating, and as he starts accelerating, the Sasquatch is keeping up with him. So, yeah. Okay.
And yeah, that's terrifying. Like, I don't want this giant person. Okay, not that I'm scared of all tall people, because I am 5'3". I'm not that tall. But it's just terrifying just to see someone keeping up with you. No. And also, for some reason I have this image in my mind that a Sasquatch has first off, it has like human like teeth, and so for some reason I always imagine the Sasquatch having like a smile on its face all the time.
No, that's creepy.
Exactly, it's so creepy. I just imagine them like that all the time. I'm just like, I can't. No.
I've never imagined that. No, it's
that's
kind of funny.
That's how they describe them though, like in other things, and I don't like that.
I would imagine it has more like canine teeth. Like, I don't know if you've seen a gorilla's teeth, but I think they have big canines.
Yeah, I see. That's that would make sense, but no, that's how other people have described it, as human-like teeth, and I just can't wrap my hands. I can't wrap my mind around that because it's terrifying. I don't want them to be like me.
Yeah, some people have said that with their encounters with Sasquatch or Bigfoot, they actually had guns and were ready to shoot it and kill it, but they hesitated because they said it just looked too human-like. They said it looked too much like a person. They couldn't tell if it was a real person or not. Maybe with some kind of deformities or something happening. They couldn't tell if it was a person or if it was an unknown creature.
Exactly. You just never know. But hopefully, they're just like super tall, and they're like, that's definitely not a person. That person cannot be 10 feet.
Yeah. So if you're ever camping out in the middle of nowhere and you start hearing wood knocks or weird sounds, vocalizations that resemble humans but are unintelligible, you can't tell what they're saying, maybe you should get out of there.
I definitely will.
All right, so our third story is going to be maybe something that most of you haven't heard before, It's about las brujas, in Spanish for the witches. Over the last few decades, there's been videos floating around the internet from Mexico, particularly from the Monterrey region, about witches flying about. And we have some family members from that area of Mexico, and they can attest to this, and maybe we'll elaborate with their stories later on. But for now, I have a really good story to share with you guys regarding these witches. But for now, let's go ahead and jump into this story. Growing up in a small town in Mexico, I was always surrounded by tales of witches, especially the lechuza, a witch that could transform into a large owl and was said to haunt the mountains near my village. My grandmother often warned us to be careful at night and to avoid wandering too far from home, especially when we heard the sound of flapping wings. She would tell stories of people who had encountered these witches and the misfortune that followed. One night, during the summer when I was about 16, a group of friends and I decided to go camping in the mountains, just a few miles from town. We set up our tents near a small clearing and spent the evening laughing and telling stories, trying to scare each other with ghost stories. As the night grew darker, I felt a strange energy in the air, but I brushed it off as my imagination. Around midnight, I stepped away from the campfire to take a walk and clear my head. The moon was bright, illuminating the path through the trees. As I wandered into the forest, I suddenly heard a rustling sound above me. I looked up and saw a large dark figure soaring through the air. At first, I thought it was just an owl, but it was much larger than any owl I'd ever seen. It swooped low, and I could make out its shape more clearly. A huge bird with wide wings, almost gliding effortlessly through the night sky. Then I heard it. A low, chilling screech that echoed through the trees. It sent chills down my spine, and I remembered my grandmother's warnings. Just as I was about to turn back, the figure landed on a nearby branch. I could see it clearly now, and I was struck by an unsettling feeling. The creature had a human-like face, with eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness, and its feathers were a mix of dark browns and blacks, almost blending into the night. My heart raced as I instinctively took a step back. The creature turned its head slowly, fixing its gaze on me. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me, as if it were searching my soul. I remembered stories of how these brujas would lure people in with their beauty or power, and a sense of terror gripped me. Suddenly, it let out another screech, and I turned to run. I dashed back through the trees, stumbling over roots and rocks, my heart pounding in my ears. As I reached the clearing, I could hear my friends laughing around the campfire, but I felt as if I had just escaped something sinister. I burst into the camp, breathless and wide-eyed. My friends immediately noticed my panic. I tried to explain what I had just seen, but they laughed, thinking I was just trying to scare them. I insisted that I had seen something, that it was just not my imagination. A few of them rolled their eyes, but one friend who had heard similar stories from his grandmother looked serious. That night, we all huddled close to the fire, and I could feel a heavy presence in the air. Every time I heard a rustle in the trees or an owl call, I tensed up, half expecting the lechuza to return. When morning finally came, I felt a sense of relief, but I couldn't shake the image of that creature from my mind. I shared my experience with my family later, and my grandmother listened intently. She told me that it was essential to respect the spirits of the night and to be careful about where I wandered. Since that night, I've avoided the mountains after dark. I still enjoy camping and hiking, but I never venture out alone anymore. That experience made me a firm believer in the tales of the lechuza. It felt real and terrifying, and I carry the memory with me, a reminder of the mysteries that lurk in the dark.
Yeah, one of the things that I would be really scared of is just animal noises, and owls are scary. They just, I don't know. First off, I it's kind of like cats, isn't it? Where you can see their eyes.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, they do have this like face where it kind of does look human because they have the eyes and they kind of have the nose.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just does feel very like human like. And also, talking about Mexico, like you said, we do have family members from there. And my grandma does have a story about experiencing this. And it's, I mean, I think she was whenever she was younger, she was walking with her mom, my great grandma, and I don't exactly know the story, but basically they were walking in their ranch, and all of a sudden they hear like an owl, and I think they start heading towards that direction, and all of a sudden they hear like a really like, they hear a swoosh near them, like right above them, and immediately my great grandma starts to pray with the rosary, because she just started to get very nervous, and she was like, well, we need to start praying because there's something's out here, something evil is out here. And
there's something weird going on, because owls are known as one of the quietest creatures alive. When owls flap their wings, it's extremely quiet. You shouldn't be able to hear anything. So the fact that your family was able to hear something, maybe it was something very big.
Yeah, and that's crazy. So my dad was telling us that there are lechuzas, and they're supposed to be very human like, and they're basically supposed to be pretty about, I'm assuming, the size like of like a person. They have like the bodies of people, and
Mothman comes to mind.
Yeah, kind of like that. They're large and they're human like, and they look like owls, but they're witches. And so in the area where my grandma lived, actually, there was supposed to be like good witches and evil witches, and so they were close to that area. And so whenever they heard that, they immediately assumed that that's a witch, that's an evil witch, most likely. So yeah, they started praying, and so then afterwards it looked like it left, so they were fine. But yeah, in that area, like in that area, you might experience that happen to you, because they're just so prominent in that Monterrey area. So it's kind of freaky. So hopefully you don't experience that, but I don't want to experience that.
So if you or we ever visit Monterrey, we have to make sure not to wander out at night.
Don't worry, my grandma lives in the city.
Okay,
now she lives in the city.
Okay, that's good. Okay, on to our fourth story. It was a cool autumn night in 2004 when my life changed forever. I was living in a small town in Northern California where the nights were often clear and filled with stars. I was out in my backyard, enjoying the tranquility and watching the sky, which was particularly vibrant that evening. Around 10 p.m. I noticed a bright light hovering in the distance, much brighter than any star or plane. At first I thought it was a helicopter, but the light didn't move like any aircraft I've ever seen. It remained stationary for several minutes before suddenly shooting straight up into the sky at an incredible speed, disappearing from sight and in an instant. Intrigued and a bit unnerved, I continued to watch the sky. A few minutes later, I felt an odd sensation wash over me, a mix of calm and unease. Suddenly, I experienced a moment of disorientation, as if I had stepped out of time. The next thing I remember was waking up, but it wasn't in my backyard anymore. I found myself in a small, brightly lit room that smelled sterile and metallic. I was lying on a table, and I felt completely immobilized. Panic set in as I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. In front of me stood 3 figures that were unlike anything I'd ever seen. They were short, about 4 feet tall, with large heads, big black eyes, and thin, spindly bodies. I felt a strange combination of fear and an odd sensation of calm as they began to communicate with me. Not through words, but through thoughts and emotions. I didn't hear their voices. Instead, I felt their intentions. Their thoughts were entering my mind as if they were directly implanting images and sensations. I sensed that they meant no harm, that they were curious about me, about my humanity. I could see flashes of images, of technology, or other worlds, or what seemed like moments from my own life. It was overwhelming, yet I strangely felt connected to them. Then I noticed what looked like instruments surrounding me, glowing softly and humming. I felt a sensation like a light pressure over my body, and I instinctively knew that they were examining me. I don't remember feeling any pain, but the experience was surreal and terrifying, but my voice wouldn't come out. Suddenly everything changed. The figures seemed to sense my fear, and I felt a wave of reassurance wash over me. They conveyed a message of unity and the importance of caring for our planet. I sensed that they had a deep understanding of the challenges humanity faced. Then, just as suddenly as I arrived, I felt a strong pull and everything went black. I woke up in my backyard, lying on the grass, staring up at the stars. My watch said 3 a.m., but I felt like I had been gone for hours, if not days. I sat up, disoriented and shaken. I looked around, half expecting to see the figures again, but I was alone. The experience left me a profound sense of wonder and confusion. I spent the next few weeks trying to process what happened. I researched UFOs and abduction experiences, and to my surprise, I found many accounts that were mirrored to my own. They were very similar. Some spoke of similar beings and feelings during their encounters. Eventually, I decided to share my story, joining a local UFO group. And it was both liberating and terrifying to speak about my experience. But I found a supportive community of people who had gone through similar things. They understood my fear, confusion, and the awe that accompanied my terror. To this day, I still think about that night. The experience has changed how I view the universe and the planet I live in. I can't explain everything I experienced, but I feel a responsibility to share my own story and advocate for awareness about the potential existence of extraterrestrial life. It made me realize that we were all connected in ways that we might not fully understand, and that there's much more to this universe than we know.
Yeah, I read this article this one time where it said that there's definitely alien life outside of what we know, but it's more like, I think, plant or amoebas or something. I don't know. But I don't know. It's either we're alone in this expanse of space, or there is life out there and we just haven't met them yet. And I don't know, it is scary to think that maybe they do want to learn about us, and the way that they do it is going to be how we look at other animals, and they might them trying to learn about us in a sense doesn't seem bad, but if we take into account how we try to research animals, I don't want to be treated that way.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah. Imagine being dissected like a frog. I don't want to be a part of that.
Nope.
But as someone once said, we're either alone in the universe or we're not. And both are equally terrifying.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And I don't know, I think it was my astronomy class. They said that the darkness in the universe is always expanding.
Yeah.
And that alone is terrifying, and just thinking that we're getting further and further away from things.
We really don't know how big the universe is, and we really don't know how big the universe is. We only know what we call the visible spectrum, or the visible universe. And we can only see about 13 point something billion light years out. in distance, but we really don't know how big the universe is. It could be a lot bigger, and the universe can be a lot older.
Yeah, that's that alone is terrifying. Just seeing how much there is out there, not knowing what there is out there. I don't know. It seems really interesting, and I mean, I would love to learn and I would love to see, but in a sense, it's still terrifying.
Yeah,
that's one of my biggest fears is just that we're slowly like getting further and further away from whatever is out there. And then I feel like one day we're just gonna like fall off the universe or something. But I don't think that's gonna happen. But still, aliens, we might be getting further and further away from them, or we just might be like, they still are. If they're able to reach us, they can reach us regardless, right? We are getting further from them, and therefore, can we even like get to that point? I don't know.
Could be. I mean, alien life could be much more advanced than us. Thousands, millions of years, maybe in billions of years. Or they could be even less advanced than us. Maybe they're not intelligent life forms. Maybe there's bacteria that exist on other planets, and maybe they're where our planet was a few billion years ago. Maybe that's where they are right now. Maybe they're just starting life right now.
Yeah. I don't know. Who knows? But that's the case, then who is probing these people? What's going on?
The Illuminati.
Probably.
I don't know. For most stories, abduction stories, I kind of attribute it to being sleep paralysis or some type of hallucination. But there's a lot of stories out like this where people have contacts and encounters with alien life. And if even a small percentage of these are real and not attributed to hallucinations or figments of the imagination, even if one of these stories are real, completely real, that's still a terrifying thought that any of us could be snatched up one day and abducted and probed.
Yes. Hopefully I'm not that interesting.
All right. Story number 5. Ghosts. It was the summer of 2010 when my family and I moved into an old Victorian house in a quiet neighborhood. The house had character, tall ceilings, intricate woodwork, and a large, creaky staircase. But it also had a history that sent shivers down my spine. The previous owners had reported strange occurrences, but my parents dismissed the stories as mere urban legends. From the moment we moved in, I felt an odd energy in the house. It wasn't just the typical creaks and groans of an old building. It felt alive, as if it had a spirit of its own. At first, I attributed my unease to my new environment. However, as the days passed, I began to notice small, inexplicable things. One night, while I was studying in my room, I heard a soft whisper coming from the hallway. I paused, thinking it was one of my siblings playing a prank. But when I stepped out to investigate, the hallway was empty. I brushed it off, but the whispers continued intermittently. Something sounding like a distant conversation, and oftentimes like a soft, mournful sigh. As the weeks went by, I experienced a series of strange occurrences. Doors would open and close on their own. Lights flickered without explanation, and I often felt a cold breeze pass through me. Even when the windows were closed, I confided in my friends, who insisted that the house was haunted, but I tried to remain skeptical. One particularly eerie evening, I was home alone while my family was out running errands. I was in the living room, engrossed in a movie, when I suddenly felt a heavy presence in the room. The air turned thick, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. I glanced at the antique mirror hanging on the wall, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a shadow figure standing behind me. As I turned around quickly, there was no one there. Shaken, I decided to grab a snack in the kitchen to distract myself, and as I stood there, I heard soft footsteps behind me. echoing on the hardwood floor. My heart raced as I turned to face the source of the sound. Again, nothing was there. Just as I was about to convince myself it was my imagination, I noticed a small object on the counter. A delicate porcelain figurine that my grandmother had given me. It had been placed carefully on the edge of the counter, and as I reached for it, it suddenly toppled to the floor and shattered. Terrified, I ran outside, calling my parents to come home early. When they arrived, I frantically told them what had happened, but they reassured me that it was just an old house settling. My mom suggested I try to communicate with whatever was there, thinking it might be a way to ease my fears. Skeptical yet intrigued, I decided to give it a try. The next night, I sat in the living room with a flashlight and a notepad. I wrote a message simply saying, "If you're here, please show me a sign." I turned off the lights, leaving only the flashlight on, and sat in silence, heart pounding. Minutes felt like hours, and just when I thought I was about to give up, the flashlight flickered, then off completely. I felt a rush of cold air. Then I heard it, a soft whisper. So close it felt like it was in my ear. "Help me." I jumped to my feet, terrified, and dashed to my room, locking the door behind me. I spent the rest of the night under the covers, heart racing and my mind racing even faster. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the house than I could understand. After that night, the activity intensified. I would hear footsteps following me from room to room, and I often caught glimpses of shadowy figures out of the corner of my eye. I felt a mix of fear and curiosity. Part of me wanted to know what was happening, while the other part of me wanted to flee. Finally, after several weeks of strange occurrences, I decided to seek help. I contacted a local paranormal group who agreed to come and investigate. They set up equipment around the house, including cameras and voice recorders, and spent the night documenting everything. They later told us that they captured several unexplained noises, including voices that seemed to respond to their questions. One of the investigators sensed a presence in the upstairs hallway and suggested we try to communicate. I joined in, feeling both anxious and hopeful. We asked questions, and to our amazement, we received responses through the spirit box. The spirit identified itself as a former resident of the house, a woman who had lived there long ago and had a strong connection to it. She conveyed feelings of sadness and longing, explaining that she was simply trying to find peace. The experience was both terrifying and enlightening. I learned that the spirit had not meant to scare us, but was looking for someone to listen. The investigators conducted a cleansing ceremony, and after that, the activity in the house significantly diminished. Though I still felt the lingering energy, it was no longer threatening. Over time, I learned to coexist with the spirit, and I even found comfort knowing she was there. My family eventually grew to accept the peculiarities of our home, and we became less fearful of the unknown. To this day, I reflect on my own experience in that old Victorian house. It opened my eyes to the possibility of life beyond death and the mysteries that linger in our world. Whether it was a ghost or simply a manifestation of my imagination, the experience left an inedible mark on my life, reminding me that the unknown can often be more profound than we dare to understand.
Ghost, I don't know. That's one of the things that I'm like, it's very hard for me to believe in. And the way that this guy just started with it. Okay, first he had two experiences, right? He saw a shadow person, and then afterwards he heard footsteps behind him, right?
Yeah.
And so in order to test this theory that there was someone there, he decided to use a flashlight, which I'm assuming is whenever you kind of put it to where the battery kind of touches it, but then kind of not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just very hard for me to believe in that test, at least. And also, I want to know what types of questions they were asking this ghost.
Yeah.
Because they could be leading questions where it's like you keep hearing it, and then afterwards you hear like scratches in the box thing.
Yeah. The spirit box?
The spirit box, and it's like, did he really hear anything or not?
Yeah, and the flashlight test can be attributed to the filament and the battery cooling down and heating up, and the expansion of the filament and the battery heating up and cooling down, causing it to close the circuit and turning on the light and then turning off the light, and then continually like repeating the process.
Exactly. So yeah, I don't know. The battery, the flashlight test is not a good one for me. But I do, I guess, have an experience with a ghost with my grandpa when I was little. This was whenever I was living in Mexico, so it was whenever maybe like I was 3 years old maybe. So this one time I don't know if I was waking up or something, but we were living with my grandma, and when I was born, actually, my grandpa died, I think, a few months before I was born. And so I never met my grandpa. And this one day, I am going downstairs and I'm telling my mom, hey, who's that man up there in the, what's it called? What's that chair called? Those things?
Rocking chair.
Who's that man up there in the rocking chair? And then my mom immediately runs upstairs and said, my dad. And so does my grandma. They both run upstairs and see, and no one's there. Yeah. So I don't know.
So your parents, or your mom and your aunt, had a feeling that your dad's...
My grandma.
So your grandma and your mom had a feeling that your grandpa's presence was still around. The spirit was still around. And so they weren't surprised to hear that you saw him.
Yeah, and actually my mom had experienced like other things aside from that. Like, I mean, she had been sleepwalking, and she was very like affected by his death. So, I mean, she had sleepwalking, sleep talking, like all the things. And so it really affected her. So she assumed that it was my grandpa. So, but yeah, I apparently saw him. I don't remember this, but I apparently did.
Yeah, I have a few stories from my family side that my grandparents had a house that was a couple hundred years old. And I would say at least half of my family, from younger cousins to older aunts and uncles and my grandparents, even my parents, they all had a paranormal experience in that house, ranging from weird noises to actually seeing floating people in white dresses. And it wasn't until recently, in the last 10 years, that we sold that property. We sold it to a commercial real estate company that was going to redevelop that land for office space. And they found a lot of graves under the home, under the foundation. And many of these graves had names and dates ranging to before the home was built. So these are some pretty old grave sites, and maybe it was the reason that people saw strange things. I remember I stayed there a long time ago. I was maybe 10, 12 years old, and I had to go to the bathroom around midnight. Everybody was already asleep. Everything was turned off. All the lights were off. And walking down those giant corridors at night was kind of creepy, but I kind of dismissed it. After leaving the bathroom, I was heading back to my room, and as I passed around the corner of the corridors, there was a chair in the corner. I could see a figure there. It was kind of dark, but the moonlight was strong enough that I could see a figure of a person sitting there. I assumed there was somebody else in the family waiting to use the bathroom after I used it, but I looked behind me, and strangely enough, they were still sitting there motionless. So I thought it was strange, but I just went back to bed, closed the door behind me. In the morning, I asked all my family members if any of them were waiting to use the bathroom before me, because it was just a strange encounter. They didn't say anything. They didn't say hello, or so nobody fessed up to being the person that was in the sofa. So I always wondered if it was maybe my grandpa, who also passed away when I was just about a year old. And recently we've also had a few experiences within the family. My father, his eyesight's not so good right now, and he's going through treatment. So hopefully he'll get better. But recently he was taking a nap on the sofa later in the night. Not too late. It was like 8 or 9 p.m. And he was alone in the home. So he was laying down on the sofa with his feet up. And somebody was tickling his feet. So he woke up. And as he got up to see who was tickling his feet, he saw a figure standing up, crouched, tickling his feet, and then started to get up. And as he was scrambling to get his glasses, the figure stood up and started walking through the living room and then the kitchen. And my dad says that the whole way this figure was laughing. It was a woman laughing. And as this woman laughed, she went through the kitchen, opened the garage door, and left through the garage. However, the strange thing about this is that the only person that has a key to this home is myself and my mom. And my mom is out of the country right now. And I wasn't even near that home, so not sure who could have been inside that home. What it could have been, whether it was inside his head, sleep paralysis, an intruder, a squatter. We don't know. Maybe it was paranormal, but the next day, my sister and we arrived and we searched the whole house, made sure there's no squatters, there's nothing there. We made sure all the doors were locked. We searched the whole house and found nothing. Everything was locked and everything looked good, so who knows, maybe it was paranormal.
Yeah, that was a pretty odd day.
And this just happened a few weeks ago.
Yeah, that's crazy. Whether it was a ghost or whether it was a squatter, yeah, I don't want some stranger living in our home, or I don't want to see this crazy lady, first of all, tickling my feet, and then all of a sudden just laughing as she heads out. That's so creepy. Like,
yeah. Yeah, my dad is older in age, and he can't see very well, but with his glasses, I think he can see well enough. But he put his glasses on, and he's slow to his feet, but he soon went to the garage, and he couldn't find anything. The garage was closed. The front doors were locked. They also have a Ring camera for the front door, and nothing was recorded. So it was very strange.
Just in case anyone is wondering, we did all pray after, just in case.
Yeah.
It was creepy, but yeah. Well, those are our 5 short stories. I hope you enjoyed them. Hope you're not too scared to sleep tonight, but we enjoyed them and we really enjoyed sharing with you. And thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining me in Dave's garage. Good night.
Good night.